So I wanted to take a moment to just give some reactions to some of the changes that are upcoming in Path of Exile's 2's new combat. A couple notes before I do. First of all, my air conditioning is broken, so if you see me sweating, it isn't because I'm anxious to talk about Path of Exile 2, although I am excited. It's just that it's 85 degrees in this house. Also, second thing to note, I just finished watching the keynote for Path of Exile at ExileCon. And what we're looking at now is some of the footage that you can find almost certainly over on Grinding Gear Games YouTube. This is the Twitch VOD that I'm looking at right now. And there's a whole bunch of changes that were discussed about the way combat works in Path of Exile 2 that I just wanted to spend some time talking about because I think it's marvelous. So first, this is just a generic boss in the game. And I really like how slow the pace of the combat is. A lot of the movement here, it feels like it's halfway between the very spammy, instant clear feeling in Path of Exile 1 at times, to some of the more slow, deliberate plotting combat in something like an Elden Ring. Now, if this game went full on on the Elden Ring Dark Souls style gameplay, that would make me a little disappointed. I do like the feeling of being able to clear through and blow up lots of enemies very quickly. But the fact that they slowed down the combat, that's the first thing that I want to talk about. I genuinely believe that for interesting and rich and dynamic combat, you actually need a little bit of breathing room in terms of time for things to occur. If an entire combat bout can occur in, say, 2-3 seconds, that's just not enough time for you to take an action, the enemy to respond to that action, you to need to respond to that response over a period of time to where you feel like that battle had a little miniature arc. Also, Potato Elemental in chat's talking about suspense. Yeah, I think suspense is really, really fun. Where, for instance, if you are rolling out of the way, and you will see rolling happening a lot during these combat sequences, the rolling, if there's a little bit of like, ooh, let me roll out of the way, and am I going to be safe? Okay, let me move. If your combat's too fast, if it's taking place within like 1 second, I just don't think that's enough. And obviously, it can be so slow to where you delete all of the fun of twitchiness and trying to do quick approximation in those fights. I really generally think that this slowdown is something that I've been wanting in Path of Exile. Almost every time I have a good build in Path of Exile 1, it allows me to show up to a screen, hit some buttons, and everything's gone. Which, I'm not going to lie, I hope that some of that does exist in Path of Exile 2. But first, I really like the pace of combat being slowed down, because I think it just gives time for breathing room. A second change that I really, really like, we just got the chance to see on the screen here, which is that abilities have movement associated with them. You see this character moving a little bit with the abilities. Some of them, you know, this sort of whoosh, where this monk swings the staff and there's a burst of air. You know, where you're actually standing still, that looks pretty archetypical. You're also seeing the roll. But if I pause here for a moment, in Path of Exile 1, you typically had some aura abilities that would just be passives that would be on, maybe an active where I just shoot a fireball, shoot a fireball, shoot a fireball, summon a totem, cast some lightning bolts, shoot my bow. All of these often just had you either stand still and shoot, or maybe you could shoot and move in pretty quick succession. And almost every single build would devote one ability to movement. One ability to movement. Now just appreciate how much this messes with design. You know that players will be walking around, standing still shooting abilities and having auras on them, or they will be able to use a flame dash to do a quick movement. That's what I mean by movement ability. Or a blink where they teleport a short distance. In Path of Exile 2, they've showed that a lot of the abilities, and I'm just going to make up one because I don't know any of the details on the abilities, but like, hey, they showed ability where you cast a spell, like a meteor, and you move back while you're casting it, and then you land. Or some of the movement with this staff, you'll see the character actually move along with the ability a little bit. And I think that that is a brilliant change, because as a designer, imagine you're trying to make an interesting encounter. where there are, you know, lines being drawn on the ground where a second later lightning will strike from the enemy. If that's the situation that you want to try to design for, well, if players can either run or use the one movement ability that is now common to use in Path of Exile 1, that's it. That's all you get to design with. And frankly, as a player, there were a lot of encounters in Path of Exile 1 where it would be, all right, I should walk out of this, or... Yeah, see, there was the dash forward where you saw the character pick off the enemy. And we'll see this a couple times. The enemies will get a little blue symbol above and our monk will dash in. In Path of Exile 1, I would just move out of the way, or I would dash out of the way. That was my choice. That was it. But now, two things happen when you add abilities that have movement. First of all, players have a lot more options in the moment. See, here it comes. Are you going to do the dash? Are you going to do the dash? Come on, do the dash. Screw it, I'm just going to rewind to show the dash, right? Yeah. Right away, you have more in-the-moment twitchy choices. So right here, you will see there's that little blue symbol that appears above the skeleton. Come on, there it is. And then joink, movement up to that. You suddenly have different choices. Maybe I want to use a new dash ability that I've equipped. Or maybe I see that there's lines on the ground, lightning's going to strike me. I'm going to use this dash ability to get there. It creates lots of in-the-moment choice, in-the-moment choice. But something that is very near and dear to my heart, I love games that have loadouts. I love games where you can plan to mix and match various tools together. I could say, okay, this dash up and hit ability, where if they have a little blue sigil, I can dash up to them. I'm going to remove that ability from my current loadout, and I'm going to use this. Maybe it's an ability that shoots a sonic wave, and as it shoots, it pushes me back. Okay, cool. I'm going to give myself that as a movement solution, and let me get another, say, Flame Dash ability also as a default movement solution. I can kind of give myself a movement kit to solve movement-based problems, which is a completely interesting and fresh axis compared to the burst down a screen in 1 second feel from Path of Exile 1. And I sort of accidentally timed this very nicely. These two things together happen right here. Slowed combat and movement-based abilities. Here, we are going to see these slow-moving skeletons against our hero that has this Frost Spike ability. The Frost Spike ability doesn't actually do a lot of damage along the path, but it does a big thunk spike at the end. Now, because combat is a little slower, enemies are a little slower, when you slow down the pace of combat, I want to stress, I'm not talking about slowing down the movement speed. I'm talking about the amount of seconds over time through which things can unfold. If you clear out the enemies in 1 second, it doesn't even matter what their movement speed is. If it does take a few seconds for the combat to play out, I kind of care about movement speed more. I kind of care about positioning more. And because this Frost Spike ability, you'll see again, this doesn't deal damage, but that big thunk spike at the end. Now, my positioning actually matters a little bit more, and therefore, movement-based abilities that could position me in a particular way to get at the right distance matters more. And also, I want to briefly note, because I see Talon Druid talking about time to kill, the pace of battle, I want to delineate between time to kill, and let me give a really simple example. The AWP in Counter-Strike is effectively a one-shot weapon. You shoot someone with an AWP, they die. But it has a long reload time. So the time to kill is virtually instant, but combined with the reload time means that an encounter of several enemies versus you can play out over a couple of seconds, which is... So time to kill often refers to if I'm just sitting here shooting at you and neither of us are moving, what is the time? It's like a variable in there. But anyways, I really like the fact that they slowed the overall pace of the combat down. I really, really like that they added different types of movement capabilities there, because it starts to make some of these positional things matter. Maybe if our character wanted to dash to that blue enemy in the back to dash past everything, they could have done that earlier. I really think that it's adding in just an enormous amount of choice. Now, one of the things that I hope, that I'm wishing for, that I think is almost certainly guaranteed to happen, given how Path of Exile 1 functioned, I do like some intense, slow, chunky, dramatic, varied combat. I think that's terrific. But I like power tripping, okay? I like games where number go up, all right? I think it would be fantastic if the developers incorporated some sequences where as you're growing in power, you can start to really clear things out, you can start to move through quickly, and then the pace of battle actually slows down a bit more. I also just want to observe how beneficial I think this slowness of combat and extra movement capabilities are. We are seeing several fast enemies, several slow enemies, and I can actually track them. I mean, I have played Path of Exile 1 for like 130, 160 hours, something like that. Nowhere near close to a hardcore enemy. I mean, I don't even know what half the enemies are in the game, because I've never seen them do anything, because I just instantly blast through them all the time. Now, for those of you who are watching when I was playing through when I was observing the keynote live, I feel like there was one other thing that I wanted to talk about with the combat that I'm trying to remember. Does anyone remember what the other thing was? God, this is going to make a great YouTube video where I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. I remember what it was. So, I think that, again, so in a vacuum, let's imagine we just took some regular combat, we slowed it down a little bit, we added variety in movement, cool, right? These are just, I think, good solves for problems that you might encounter in Path of Exile 1 style combat design. But I think that they've done a number of things that they say, hey, what do we now get to do with this kind of system? How can we leverage this kind of system to allow some more cool dynamics in the fight? One of them is this little blue symbol floating above. If your combat is so fast that the enemies get wiped out, you don't even get the time to make a choice. But now, with enough time, that little blue sigil, that I can't remember what it is, you actually get a little opportunity to make a choice. And they've baked in a couple of extra choice mechanics in that I think are terrific. They noted that freeze in Path of Exile 1 was just, you either get frozen or you're immune to that, and that's it. It's very binary. And they said they took some inspiration from Elden Ring in terms of status effects. And if you haven't played Elden Ring, I'm going to give a little bit of a sort of hand-wavy description of it. No enemy is immune to freeze. Rather, one enemy might say, I need 1,000 ticks of freeze to be built up before I get frozen. And another enemy might need 30 ticks of freeze before it gets frozen. So you don't have like a resistance so much, you just need more build up before I still get this effect. It's not like I'm immune to freeze. And what they said during the keynote is that this is how they have factored in things like freeze effects, and I assume various shock and ignite and poison debuff, all sorts of effects like that. And in Elden Ring, which I loved, and you should check out my 1 million part playthrough on YouTube, in Elden Ring, you heard me regularly evaluating whether this enemy was vulnerable to bleed, that enemy was not vulnerable to bleed, which enemy was vulnerable to stagger effects, which weren't vulnerable to stagger effects. And it would change meaningfully the way in which I would use my abilities against them, be it that spear ability to do the enemies that were easy to stagger, or my, cross Naginata for the bleeds. And so, in this fight, they were noting that this boss, Blackjaw, is not immune to freeze effects, but our hero that we're seeing play, Mark is continuing to apply buildup of freeze, and in a little bit, we will see Blackjaw get frozen. And I mean, I think that's awesome. I think that's marvelous, because there's certain play patterns where you're going to be like, ooh, I want to do this when my enemy is frozen, but I might have my other abilities that I'm cycling through, and I'm looking for a window of opportunity, and there's the freeze effect. I might want to use my freeze buildup and my freeze payoff more frequently versus this enemy type, or I might want to not even worry about the freeze effect versus this highly freeze resistant enemy, and I might want to change up my other play patterns. I think you don't get the opportunity to use those kinds of mechanics if your gameplay is too fast. And when I say too fast, don't get me wrong. I do think that having fast, snappy combat is important. Slowed down could be the difference of 1 second combat to 4 or 5 second combat. But as I've just been having this footage behind, you've been seeing the pace of battle in some places be quick, in some places be slower, but all of this is still substantially slower than Path of Exile 1. And upon watching this, I cannot even stress how excited I was about watching playing Path of Exile 2 when it drops in the beta next year. For those of you who didn't see, it's June 7th, 2024. God, I was a year off on when I thought I'd be able to play it, but that's fine. I'm really excited to play because, don't get me wrong, my favorite part of action RPGs is number go up. It's the power trip. It's getting huge. But I really do love that Elden Ring Dark Souls style combat where you have to observe what's happening. You do need some attention. And there is some pacing that will punish you if you are not paying attention. And I can't wait. Oh yeah, this is actually the perfect screen to end on. I cannot wait to have death happen like this when I'm playing PoE 2, where there was a couple hits, death. As opposed to full health, death, as it was in PoE 1. I think Path of Exile 2 looks unbelievable. I also want to give a shout out to Grinding Gear Games for just doing a live showcase of one of their devs playing against a boss. And it was so not rigged that the dev died on air, and they awkwardly were like, all right, well, we're just, hold on 1 second, we're going to get him in there again. Oh, hell yes, Grinding Gear Games, that's what I'm fucking talking about. So anyways, those are some of my thoughts and reactions of the Path of Exile 2 combat changes that make me very excited. Okay, bye.